For the third reading this morning, I've chosen a New Year's resolution that I made. My dear companions on the journey, I've recently been made aware that some members may be hesitant to commit themselves to the community because they are not sure of my commitment. It's a valid concern. However, since July 2022, I've seen a significant upswing in our Sunday Mass attendance due to new members from around the globe, and I've had very many personal communications supporting my message. As long as I have significant support for my mission, and there won't be any efforts to censor me, I feel that being spiritual director is a great use of my time and energies. I will continue to also pursue other avenues, interviews, books, Instagram, Pathos, etc., to try to awaken the world to Christ consciousness. I have always preached the vital importance of each member developing their own informed personal cosmology. I've said many times that a community should do two things for its members. A, support them in their search for truth, and B, challenge them in their current belief systems. This is a two-way process, with the members doing the same for the community, while always treating each other with love and respect. If, as spiritual director, I never upset anybody, then my message is bland pablum. If I constantly upset a majority of the community, then I would need to find a different community. The balance is to stretch myself and the members with a message that will upset some people sometimes, but will inspire most people most times. Part of my personal cosmology is to make sure I'm optimizing my own ministry of outreach. I believe I can do that as a member and as spiritual director of COJ for the foreseeable future. In the meantime, I am deeply grateful for your commitment individually to your own spiritual growth and to helping our family evolve. With love and gratitude, Sean O'Leary. Words inspired by God. For the month of January, I've chosen the theme of how I see Gaia herself, how I see COJ, and how I see my own self, possibly evolving and being light workers for our very troubled times. And so if I were to give this homily a title, I would call it Companions on the Journey, aka Warriors on the Way. And so this morning's homily, and I'll continue next Sunday, God willing, I want to just deal with 2 points. I want to look at our joint evolution going forward in this year. And secondly, I want to look at what I'm going to call a 3-way pivot. So firstly, I want to look at the fact that we're all fractals of God. We're bite-sized pieces of divinity. And at every level, this pattern holds. So I see this fractal of God illustrated by the very planet itself, by Gaia. I see COJ as a fractal of that, and I see each one of us as individuals as fractals of that. So I've long been fascinated with the Hindu notion of body. In the West, we've got a very impoverished notion of body. We think that the body is basically just kind of our cellular activity, that we've got about 70 trillion cells that kind of cluster into various organs and various subsystems like the cardiovascular system or the musculoskeletal system. But in actual fact, where the body is much, much more complex than that. In the Hindu model, you've got a physical body described by Western medicine very well, but then you've got an etheric body, the kind of the energy template of which the physical body is simply a hard copy or a printout. And then you've got a third level of body that they call the astral body. It is the body that we inhabit when we're dreaming at night, in which there is neither time nor space, and causation is very different. As soon as you have a thought, you manifest it. It's the place as well where our emotions reside, and it's the place, according to Hinduism, where all of the memories of the lifetime just finished once we die are archived so that we can pick up on them when we reincarnate. And then there's a fourth level of body that they call the mental body, the place of ratiocination and logic, Plato's ideal realm, the place from which we download all great ideas, the place of insight. Above that is they call it the psychic body, the place where our real abilities, which have gone hidden and atrophied, of psychokinesis, telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, all of these things are still resident as part of our patrimony. Above that is the kind of the Atman, or soul self. And then finally, we have cosmic reality, our source itself. Now, I've long believed that this model is true not just for the individual person, but also for Gaia herself, for Pachamama. And so when I think about this, I say the physiosphere is like the kind of the densest body of the planet. The physiosphere is the third rock from the sun in this particular solar system on the outskirts of the Milky Way galaxy. That's just the rock, the physiosphere. At some stage, a great soul called Gaia, I believe, volunteered and said to God, send me to that third rock from the sun in that solar system, and I'll begin to breathe life until I throw up a life form capable of recognizing its own divinity, and ipso facto, the divinity of all other life forms with which it shares the planet. But in order to do that, it first had to create an atmosphere. And so in some senses, that for me is the second body of Gaia. It is the womb in which she's going to kind of conceive and carry life. So that the atmosphere is that function. It is the womb that surrounds the physiosphere. The third stage is then the biosphere. Now, having created the womb of an atmosphere, Gaia begins to give life, flora and fauna of various kinds. And the world is, as we look around us, is filled with our siblings, the life forms whom Gaia has created in the womb of our atmosphere. Now, there's a next stage beyond that. Tyler de Chardin would have called it the noosphere, from the Greek word nous, meaning mind. And we see the beginning of that with something like, for instance, the telegraph, the invention of the telegraph, or the invention particularly of the internet. So what it is it's a sheath of consciousness that surrounds the biosphere itself. And we're in that transition right now from the biosphere to the noosphere, in my opinion. And it's a very, very dangerous stage, because once we develop that kind of ability, we develop the technology to really make it go backwards or to destroy the thing completely. So we're at this very crucial stage of the evolution of Gaia, because there are 3 more stages beyond that if we manage to survive the noosphere. The next sphere I call the anima sphere, from the Latin word anima, meaning the soul. And this is a sheath of soul that surrounds the noosphere, if we can survive into that. Beyond that is, I call it the pneuma sphere. Pneuma as in spirit, the Greek word for spirit. So it's spirit itself. And then finally, there's the cosmosphere, source itself. Now, I see very, very clearly at this stage that we're in a gigantic struggle as we move through the noosphere. We're moving from a struggle between those I would call Homo artificialis, robotic transhumanists on the one hand, and Homo spiritualis on the other. So this journey from the biosphere to the noosphere is fraught with danger. It literally is a minefield to which we're attempting to pick our way at this stage. But I can see that struggle. I also see the kind of the emerging architecture of the animasphere, what it is going to look like if we manage to make that journey through the noosphere and do it really, really well. And I'm really excited because I see, our role as COJ, companions on the journey, our warriors on the way, as part of this. And that phrase, warriors on the way, which came to me in a dream some months ago, where companions on the journey is COJ, this warriors on the way is wow, literally wow, warriors on the way. So for me, it's a wow stage of our journey as companions on the journey. And being warriors on the way is not about violence. It is about the courage to confront and the wisdom to lead. And that is our job as a community. And our job as part of the world community is to be people who have the courage to confront that which needs to be confronted and dismantled, and the wisdom to lead where the system is going into the animasphere. And so for myself, I'm attempting to hold this balance. I've spoken of many, many times, the 80-20 rule, that we're moving into a place where 80% of our thoughts should be around the future, the esoteric and the mystical, and 20% about confronting and challenging the very real darkness that we encounter in our lives as human beings. And I see it that it is about joining with other light-filled communities, like some kind of, like we are neurons on Gaia's global brain. And she, Gaia, is pregnant with a great awakening, not a great reset a la the WEF, but a great awakening, as in the movement into the anosphere. Now, some of these groups will have single focus. There'll be groups who will evolve because they're interested in education, how to really educate our little children in the sense that is really calling forth the spirit within them instead of indoctrinating them with a whole bunch of other stuff. There'll be people, communities who focus on food production, different ways of feeding the planet. There'll be groups who'll be interested in healing modalities, going back to nature for the remedies, for our times and our diseases. But these individual communities I see as they are temporary stages of transition away from this global cabal into full spectrum, decentralized, interdependent communities. So it's like these new groups, as I see it, are individual organs that finally become a fully independent organism, in the same way that the heart and the spleen and the lungs, come together and create the organism that you call you. So our joint evolution for me is going apace. It is the evolution of our planet, it is the evolution of our community, and it's the evolution of every single member of our community. So that's my first point, our joint evolution. The second point I want to talk to, and I'm going to call it a three-way pivot. Beginning in April of 2022, I spent a lot of time trying to envisage, my own personal ministry and future, and that of COJ. And what I began to see was that we need to try to create some kinds of communities that can link up with each other internationally, literally like these neurons on the global brain of Gaia. And I spent a lot of time speaking with people, wise people, people whom I regard as very wise people, and talking with them on an individual basis. People like Michael Choi, people like Karen Rubin, people like Amy Dillon, people like Lorraine Moore, people like David Karkig, people like Tom Peters, people like Wavendine Fernandez and his friends Gurian and John Oland, whom I hosted here on several occasions. I've had the luck of interacting with a lot of great thinkers over the last year, particularly people like Regina Meredith in Gaia, people like Paul Chek, people like Philip Cargom, the Druid, people like Julie Ryan. I've had one-on-one interviews with these people. And in the case of Philip Cargom and Amy Dillon, we did a trialogue a piece ago, looking at the interface between Druidism and Christianity, which was beautifully facilitated and organized by Amy. And she's attempting to set up another trialogue as well. So it's been really, really uplifting to me to be able to kind of hear the views and pick up on the wisdom of these individual people and these kinds of organizations. And the result is that I've seen this extraordinary kind of shift in our demographics, that we're truly becoming an international community, COJ, from a small little group that started in Palo Alto 25 years ago, to now we've got people who are in some senses part of our community, all the way from Tasmania to the United States of America, and from Mexico to Canada. So the demographics are changing because we are literally becoming, a neuron, some kind of maybe even a central nervous system connecting groups all over the world. Now, I think that there may be kind of, as this community evolves, there may be three distinct kind of demographic versions of it, or hybrids of these, or combinations and permutations. And so three different kind of foci of focuses. And some of these ideas I got particularly from Tom Peters. I'm deeply, deeply grateful to Tom for his extraordinary wisdom. This notion that there's a distinction between the message, the liturgy, and the community. And Tom's brilliant feedback was that there are some people who are interested in a message, but not particularly being part of a community, that they want to be moved by ideas and messages for our times. There's another group, and for whom ritual is really, really, really important, particularly the liturgy of Eucharist. But they're not particularly open to a new message. They're focused on the liturgy. And then there are people for whom community is really, really important, and the message is not that important, and maybe even the liturgy isn't that important, but they need some form of togetherness. Every person can be, maybe you get somebody who's only interested in one of these facets, or two of the three, or maybe all three themselves. And so I want to just dip into those three categories for a few minutes for the rest of this homily and see what it brings up for me. So I want to look at the notion of the message, for instance. There are some people, and what they want at this stage of the confusion is to find some teaching or some message that can inspire them in the darkness, that brings some kind of light into their lives, because there's so much propaganda and there's so much darkness around us. They're not interested in becoming members of any community, and they're not interested in any form of ritual, but they're very definitely interested in a message that inspires them and brings light into their lives. And I know that for me personally, I've tried to address this by the homilies I give, by the books I've written, and I'm currently trying to do an audio version of the Setting God Free book. I've actually finished recording it with a friend of mine, John Euland, and now we got to try and edit it. So I've been reaching out in that way. Amy Dillon and Karen have set up Instagram accounts and Facebook accounts where I can try to get my understanding of a message out to a wider community. So I'm deeply grateful to Karen and to Amy for orchestrating and running that. I've been trying to do this over the years through retreats. And again, Karen is the leader in this aspect. She's organized this great retreat coming up again in March from the 19th to the 23rd, I believe. I try to do this with lectures of various kinds and interviews that I've given. And a lot of the thinking for me comes when I'm being interviewed by somebody who's asking questions that I perhaps hadn't asked of myself before. And so there's a lot of other interviews actually lined up, and ones I have done, which have been, the interviews are finished, but they haven't been aired yet. So as far as the message is concerned, I'm really trying to reach out to people who have no interest in liturgy and no interest in community, but they're interested in an inspirational message for our times. So I'm trying to push the envelope on that as part of my contribution to the world right now. So that would be the message aspect. There are other people for whom liturgy or ritual of various kinds is really, really important. And I count myself as one of those people. And particularly for me, a Eucharist-based liturgy has been really, really important to me. After 50 years as a priest celebrating Eucharist, there's not a single occasion when the ritual itself doesn't transport me someplace else, where it's not an out-of-body experience for me, or where it's not a kind of an altered state of consciousness in which there is no time and there is no space anymore, or there is no person anymore. So people for whom ritual is very, very important, then, I'm trying to kind of see if there's something I can do and something that we can do as a community to further this. So I've been thinking for about a year of creating what I call a DIY, a do-it-yourself liturgy, based on the Eucharistic prayer of the cosmos as a kind of a skeleton or as a framework that I can, with the help of some members of the community, particularly people like maybe David Carkeek and Michael Choi, to set up a system where we can create a version of our Eucharist in which the Eucharistic prayer of the cosmos is the kind of the framework. And then we build in directions and invite people, pick your own music. Here's where you might pick an entrance hymn. Here's where you might pick a meditation after communion. So we create spaces and directions so that the person can go anywhere they want and pick whatever music appears to them. The same thing for readings. Here's a place where you could fill in a reading from any source you want. It could be from a novel. It could be a poem of any kind. It could be from the scriptures of the world. Here's a place you might fit in some kind of readings. And here's a place where you might fit in a homily of some kind or a lecture from any source you want. So it's creating a kind of a template that can be self-tailored to any occasion in a person's life, of any duration, anywhere from half an hour long to 2 hours long, for any group of people. That people have a resource, and I put it up on the website as a free access to anybody who wants to access it, so that people can create for their own circumstances and their own particular group of people and their own occasion, any duration of liturgy that they want, and they can just fill in the gaps for themselves. So for me, liturgy is always an invitation to literally go transrational. And I don't mean irrational, I mean transrational, beyond reason, beyond space, beyond time, and beyond person, to go transpersonal. So it's a way of helping people to create altered states of consciousness in which, as individuals, they can have mystical, Gnostic experiences. That becomes really important, that it's shifting our state of consciousness that's going to shift the world. The world is not going to be changed just by practical changes we make in kind of various facets of life, like our agriculture, our education system, or our healing modalities. It won't just be changed by that. It has to be changed primarily by a shift in our consciousness, which will lead then to the creation of different ministries in those other fields. But to attempt to change those without changing consciousness, we're battling against demons. So try to create some kind of liturgies, because there was an old statement around the rosary when I was a child growing up in Ireland: the family that prays together stays together. And so in some senses, the family that learns to do ritual together, or liturgy in some senses, that family stays together, whether it's just a nuclear family or a kind of a community, you know, a little community or a bigger community. So that would be like the second pivot, or the second form of outreach. And the third one then would be community itself, that there are people for whom physical proximity is really, really important. And that's how we started off as a group, you know, literally coming together in Palo Alto, hugging each other. And so it doesn't matter in some senses what brings a community together. It might be an interest in gardening, or in fitness, or a book club of various kinds. But a lot of people crave some form of community. And as I've said many times, and said in my New Year's resolution, the function of any community, a spiritual community particularly, must be to challenge and to support. That any community must support the search for truth of its members, and also challenge the current belief systems of its members. And the members must do the same thing for the community. Otherwise, the community just becomes a cult, locked into some kind of dogma. And so we must be searching for truth, you know, and at the same time supporting each other. And I always remember this beautiful statement in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, where he expands on something in which you find in the canonical Gospels, where he says, those who seek will find. And when they find, they will be disturbed. And when they're disturbed, they will marvel. And when they marvel, they will rule. And when they rule, they will rest. The third stage of the journey always is being disturbed. If I'm not prepared to be disturbed, I may as well abandon the search. And disturbance has to do with the fact that I'll find some new level of truth when I've cast off some level of illusion that pulls the rug out from underneath me. And my whole worldview is up for grabs, and I want to retreat and go back to the old system. There's no evolution possible at that stage. I'm just returning to home. I can't make it on my own, so I'm living in my parents' basement for the rest of my life. So it has to be that we challenge each other and we support each other at the same time. The physical community has an importance, you know, maybe for places for doing liturgy. It may be to parties. It means having meals together. And I want to really, really thank again Ria Toulis for the extraordinary leadership that she exercised for 7 years in our community, where she had this extraordinary ability to bring people together for celebrations of all kinds. That kind of physical proximity, eating together, having fun together, is also a very important part of community. Over the last few years, we've experienced a very new form of community for most of us. It's kind of the Zoom community. And while that seems to have been a kind of a default position because we couldn't get together, there have been extraordinary advantages that have come from that. We have extraordinary cross-cultural connections that we never would have had as simply a physical community. So the value of the Zoom community is really, really huge. For me, it is helping us to shepherd our way through the noosphere, to kind of guide our steps between the transhumanist agenda on the one hand and Homo Spiritualis that's inviting us into Christ consciousness on the other hand. And so the Zoom facility has really, really enabled us to do that. And again, thanks to Lawrence Bird for organizing that for us initially, and for Michael Joy for picking it up right now. and for people like David Carkeek who support that, and people like Bill Miller who support that. I think community will have maybe a hybridization process where it's many kinds of community, the Zoom community, the physical community, maybe pods of physical groups meeting together through Zoom. So you've got both the physical community where people hug each other, connected to other people on the Zoom session, some kind of a hybrid. And as I've said many times, that every community, needs three facets. This is what I used when I was in Kenya and speaking Swahili. It was kujitegemea, kujitumikia, na kujieneza. Kujitegemea means self-reliance, that every community needs to become self-reliant, not waiting for handouts from any other group in order for its survival. It needs to be kujitumikia, which means self-ministering. Whatever the need is in the community, that there are people within the community that can answer that need. And then finally, kujieneza, self-propagating, not in the sense of proselytization, but in the sense that if you're doing something that's working, it'll be attractive to other groups of people who will then organize themselves, and try to do something for themselves. And I've talked many times about what then does ministry look like. And I don't care whether you're talking about a priest, I don't think whether you're talking about a bishop, a lector, a communion minister, healing the sick, visiting the sick, whatever it is. Every ministry has four facets. The first one is there is a need in the community, some kind of need. The second one is that there's a volunteer who says, I'll do that. The third one is that the volunteer is given the training necessary to accomplish that task. And the fourth one is that the person is then commissioned by the community to act in that capacity in its stead. And there you have ministry. Ministry is not some bishop with a mitre putting hands on somebody and saying, I ordain you as a priest. Ministry evolves organically from the community itself. Both the needs, the volunteers, the training, and the commissioning come from within the community. There's another facet which is really important and which, we need to keep focused on as well. And it's the notion of every community must be involved in some kind of service outreach, that we're not just completely self-engrossed. And we had a history of doing this in the past at COJ. Every year, at the end of the year, whatever excess money we had, we sat down as communities to decide, where are we going to give this money away? To whom are we going to give this money away? And we had, we talked about, some kind of global effort, international, national, and local. And right now, we've been doing it, particularly under the leadership of Bill and Sharon, with the Catholic Worker House in Redwood City, that we're inviting members of COJ, to think outside the immediate community of COJ and to begin looking at who else might we need and what can we do with our resources as they are. So I think this is a place that, as a community, we can continue to brainstorm together and figure out, are there other forms of outreach? Are there other needs, either locally, nationally, internationally, or globally, in which COJ can be, a source or a resource? In that sense, then, my vision is that somehow COJ becomes like a central nervous system for these three demographics, for those interested in the message, those interested in the liturgy, those interested in community. It's like we become some kind of a neuronal circuit on the spiritual brain, helping the awakening to Christ consciousness, to Buddha nature, and to self-realization. And finally, I would say that what I've repeated many times is, this is precisely why your soul volunteered to be here now. Happy New Year.